The first option, we'll call it option A, implements the strategies in the 2019 plan with some modification. We did hear from folks during that August community engagement. With each of these options, we're going to touch on all of these points: the geography, the hours of operation, the rates, the exceptions, the revenues and expenses, the advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so you'll see that theme throughout each of these options. This is the revised sort of map geography. You'll notice that this looks slightly different than what we were talking about back in August. When we were out in the community, we made a few adjustments. We expanded in some areas, we reduced in other areas, but this is sort of that consistent theme of continuity amongst the various districts within downtown. So the hours of operation are those hours in which rates will be charged. So Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then Friday and Saturday from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Notice there was no Sunday on that hours of operation. I'll touch on that here in just a second. Fees will be charged at a flat rate of 75 cents per hour across the board. In lieu of hourly charges, a daily rate of $5 will be offered in parking lots and $10 in parking structures. The original plan contemplates sort of a variable rate structure, right? In higher demand areas, there's generally a higher rate. In lower demand areas, there's generally a lower rate. Folks were concerned and confused about kind of how that worked, so we said, hey, we hear you, we understand that. In lieu of daily rates, users can enter into agreements with the city and pay monthly rates. $35 per space per month in parking lots and $70 per space per month in parking structures. This is going to be our baseline across the system. Outside of the aforementioned hours of operation, again, note the fact that we did not include Sunday in the hours of operation. There will be no charge for parking. That also goes for evenings. Over the course of the first year, we'll collect data. We'll also analyze demand and occupancy. And after the first full year, we'll return to City Council a recommendation to adjust rates if necessary. So then we get into the exceptions. Obviously, things like accessible parking. Handicap accessible parking is an exception. Under state law, handicap accessible parking we can't charge for. It's a little bit nuanced in the statute, right? But we're going to try to respect not only the letter of the law, but also the intent of the law. And we're going to try to avoid charging for accessible parking at all possible. The next two, loading and rideshare designated parking and 15-minute designated parking with a registered session. These locations will be kind of reviewed and approved by the city engineer and our traffic engineer, based on proximity to uses, proximity to other designated parking spaces. So you might find a 15-minute designated parking space that'll be signed. We would not charge for parking during that first 15 minutes as long as the user registered for a session. We'll get into that here in just a minute. Another exception is event parking. So those on-street parking spaces and off-street lots and structures that are currently utilized for event parking and within 3 blocks of Century 2, Intrust Bank Arena, and Riverfront Stadium will continue to charge for parking at event rates, regardless of the times previously mentioned. So if you go to an event today at Century 2 and you pay X, whatever that is, you can reasonably anticipate to continue to pay those event rates at those event times. The last exception under option A are special events. Okay, so special events such as the Farm and Art Market may petition City Council as part of the approval process to make adjustments to parking rates to support the event. Staff will evaluate the request, the impact it'll have on the fund, and make a recommendation to City Council as part of the request. Okay, so this is where we'll get into kind of some of the numbers, right? And this is where some of the numbers we talked a little bit earlier about sort of matter. There in the first column, you see sort of June 2024. This is when we presented to City Council the amended and restated agreement with the car park. At the time, we said there were revenues of about $3.3 million. That was based on 5,176 spaces. So the one key indicator I want you to focus on is the revenue per space. That's going to be a key indicator. That's what we talked about, right? When we said, if we're not generating $600 per space per year, then we're not going to be able to truly take care of the O&M and capital expenses If we're not recovering $400 per space per year, we're not recovering our operations and maintenance. Those are the key numbers I'm going to have you focus in on. Below in the expenses, you see operation and maintenance. You see that CapEx, or those meters, right, that we are acquiring. So after the first 5 years, once those meters are paid off, then that's money that can go back into the system. But for right now, we got to pay off sort of that equipment, total expenses, net gain or loss. In option A, again, between June with feedback from the August community engagement, the map that we showed a little while ago, along with as we convert one-way streets to two-way streets, right, there are a number of opportunities for us to introduce more on-street parking. So option A, and really kind of the rest of the system, everything in that boundary, makes up about 7,100 spaces. And again, the reason why I emphasize that is you'll notice on the total revenue from June till now, you'll see an uptick in the revenues that we're projecting. Even though we've reduced the rates and we've implemented these hours of operation, so on and so forth, because there are more spaces, there is more revenue. However, notice that revenue per space goes down. Even if we implement option A, we're still only recovering $491, not the $600, but it is more than the $400. Those are the O&M expenses you see at the bottom of the screen and the net gain or loss. The advantages and disadvantages to option A. The advantages include, of the four options that we're presenting, the greatest likelihood of recovering costs associated with O&M, the most effective means of managing parking, the most equitable parking environment, and does provide for some capital investment. The disadvantage is that it introduces paid parking where paid parking does not currently exist, and that it doesn't recognize some existing parking agreements. Option B has all the same features of option A, but includes the first hour of metered parking free. Again, geography doesn't change, hours of operation don't change, rates don't change. But here's where you see the change, is the introduction of an exception that says the first hour is free with a registered session. When we say a registered session, that is that a user has to enroll in a session using either the kiosk or a mobile app to establish when that parking commenced, right? So we know when that hour is free. With that being said, the city still needs to purchase all of the same equipment in order to do that. So there's no cost savings per se by offering up the first hour free. There's a more expensive option of not having a session. We didn't even entertain that. That just adds personnel and costs. And as you're about to see, giving up the first hour is not a viable long-term option. Failure to enroll in a session would result in a citation. All of the same exceptions to option A apply: accessible parking, loading ride share, 15-minute designated parking, event parking, special events. There's a really great table that's in the plan. It shows kind of the advantages and disadvantages of managing parking through time limits versus managing parking through meters and pricing. At the end of the day, managing parking through time limits becomes very labor intensive. It's ineffective. Something else that we took into consideration was recent data acquired by geolocation vehicle data suggests that 35% of visitors to Delano, downtown, and Old Town collectively have a dwell time of less than 1 hour. So that means people, whether they're coming locally or from 1,000 miles away, across the spectrum, folks that frequent Delano, downtown, and Old Town, 35% stay for an hour or less. So by making the first hour free, that's a loss of more than a third of our revenue projections while still maintaining the same O&M costs and capital investment. Shown here in the table, kind of side-by-side comparison, you can see in the total revenue, we didn't change the number of spaces. You see the dip in revenues from about $3.5 million to about $2.25 million. We've now dropped below the $400 per space per year that is necessary just to recover our O&M. You see the expenses down there in the bottom, and our net gain and loss actually goes negative now. The advantages to option B: there is a likelihood of recovering some costs associated with O&M. In 2018, the system was only recovering $227 per space per year. This is now $319, so we are recovering more monies for operation and maintenance. It introduces some concepts of managing parking, getting folks to use and engage and enroll in sessions. It is more equitable than some of the other options we're about to show you, but the disadvantages are that it does not recover all costs associated with O&M. It compromises safety and security in the public lots and garages. One of the aspects of operation and maintenance includes what we call kind of clean and safe. So it's the cleanliness of the facilities, but it also speaks to the safety and security of the facilities. We have a security contract out there right now, and while we've made investments in increasing the presence of security personnel in our parking lots and structures, by taking in less revenue than what we need, it's going to compromise safety and security. It's not as effective at managing parking. It also may be hard to eliminate even with predetermined goals. So one of the ideas was, do the first hour free. If it doesn't meet certain performance measures, then remove it. The reality is that's going to be really hard to eliminate, even if we do have sort of predetermined goals. And then obviously does not contribute to our future capital needs. Okay, option C builds on option B and adds 2 Old Town alternatives. This was a request that kind of came out of some of the folks in the Old Town area. So you can kind of see the geography. The geography really hasn't changed. There is sort of this overlay of kind of how Old Town might be treated differently. Hours of operation don't change, rates don't change. We do introduce a new exception though, right? And that exception is Old Town. Old Town will not have any parking meters or time limits. This option is broken down into 2 sort of sub-options, option C1 and C2. C1 is basically we're going to take all of the existing in lieu of parking agreements and we'll have to raise the rates. Option C2 is this idea of, well, what if could we add a CID sales tax? Could we add a 1% sales tax? And if that generated enough revenue, could you offset that with some of the in lieu of parking agreement rates? So according to our records, there are 1,721 spaces in Old Town. Just to recover costs associated with O&M, remember $400 per space per year, Old Town would need to generate $688,000 just to cover O&M. Currently, we are recovering approximately $264,000 annually. That's a gap of almost $424,000 annually. Anybody that's frequented Old Town recently can probably tell there's a lack of an ability to maintain our existing assets even in Old Town. Here's kind of where I'm going to deviate a little bit without going into the modeling around C1 and C2. Regardless of whether option C1 or C2 is employed, Old Town would be required to contribute the $688,000 for O&M. Failure to contribute the $688,000 would simply result in deferred maintenance, which is what we're trying to avoid. Any O&M only budget projection would remain unchanged. We look at that from the context of theoretically we're receiving the $400 per space per year, so our O&M only budget projections are unchanged, but we can reasonably expect a loss of revenue totaling $344,000 towards a combined O&M and CapEx budget projection. And this kind of shows that in that side-by-side comparison. You'll notice we still are maintaining the same 7,110 spaces. We've removed that additional revenue stream from total revenues, and now we're only recovering $242 per space per year. Given the operation and maintenance expenses, capital investment, you'll notice there is a slight downturn in the capital expense for meters because we wouldn't be purchasing meters and equipment for Old Town. If there are no meters, there is no management. So you see a slight savings there, but again, net gain or loss, we're now in the negative $1 million net gain loss. The advantages of option C, again, we'll kind of go back to, we are recovering $242, so it is a slight increase from the $227 that was previously calculated in 2018. So there is an increased likelihood of recovering some costs associated with O&M, and it does introduce some concepts of managing parking. Those are mainly remnants of option B. Remember, this is building on option B. The disadvantages of option C, it does not cover all costs associated with O&M, compromises safety and security in the public lots and garages. It's not as effective at managing parking, may be hard to eliminate even with predetermined goals. Again, those are all kind of remnants of option B. Option C does not contribute to capital needs, subsequently requiring the system as a whole to subsidize any capital needs within Old Town. Non-compliance will require lawsuits to recover fees, and it's an inequitable parking environment resulting in unintended consequences. Option D does not implement any of the strategies identified in the 2019 plan. And you see the side-by-side comparison to all of the other options. We can continue to maintain the status quo. That's an advantage of option D. However, the disadvantages are it's an inability to recover O&M needs resulting in perpetual decline of the parking assets, an inability to provide sufficient security in the public lots and garages, inability to manage growing parking demand in the core and the retail areas, requires the use of taxpayer dollars to fund deferred maintenance in perpetuity, and it results in inequitable parking regulation as we see today.